Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our collections conversation focusing on women's history. My name is Ann Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of the Laurel Historical Society here in Maryland. And I have a great bunch of ladies with me tonight to present our informal conversation on women's history focused around the collections and archives at the Laurel Museum. So I have Sandra Johnson. She's a local historian, member of St. Mark's Church in the Grove. So she'll be talking to us a little bit about some of the women that you met last month in our first collections conversation. And then we'll be able to fill in a lot more of the details and the stories of their lives. Monica Stardovich, you also will remember from last month. Monica is our assistant director here at the Historical Society. And we'll be just kind of jumping in and talking a lot about the behind the scenes and some of the work that the two of us do at the Laurel Museum. And then Karen Lubieniecki, she is a local historian as well, and one of our most active volunteers at the Historical Society. And she did a lot of work on our collections committee and our exhibits as well. So she'll be able to talk about some of her research in all the different areas that she's worked in. So again, if you just joined us, we are recording this session tonight. It will be available on our YouTube channel in a couple days, and we will send you an email to let you know when that is live. Again, just real briefly about working of the webinar here with our Zoom presentation tonight. You do have access to both the chat box and to the Q&A box down below. So if you have any questions or comments, please, we really encourage that. So even though this is a conversation, we can't really see you or hear you, but we want to have you part of that conversation. So please, if you have a comment or question or need anything clarified, please feel free to type it into the chats or into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to it as we move along through the presentation tonight, or definitely at the end of our session. And we also have a couple other guest speakers that will be helping us as we come through our presentation tonight, and I'll introduce them as we get to those slides. So I think we will start kind of at the beginning when we talk about Women's History Month. We have a lot to celebrate. And I think it's very appropriate that we talk about how the museum came to be. And this is also a good year. It doesn't quite seem that way in a lot of regards, but for the museum and its history, it is a good year because 2021 is the 25th anniversary of the start of the Laurel Museum, even though the Laurel Historical Society goes all the way back to 1975. So we wanted to highlight a few of our early museum founders and members who really got the museum up off the ground, and without whom I would not have a job. You wouldn't see this beautiful building behind me. And I'm going to pass it over to Karen to talk a little bit about those early members.
Okay. Well, this is actually probably one of my favorite pictures. The woman on the left is Elizabeth Betty Compton, and the woman on the right is Jane Cole. And Betty and Jane are really, we call them our founding directors, and that's because without them, there literally would be no Laurel Historical Society. For those of you who don't know their background a little bit, they both grew up in Laurel. Betty's parents lived both on 2nd Street. Her grandmother's house was there and her family lived there before 2nd Street went through. In fact, we have interesting stories from her childhood on that. And she also lived on Main Street. So she grew up in Laurel. And then she and her husband, Dick, who was in the Army, actually were stationed in Japan for a number of years and then came back to Laurel. Jane spent most of her life here in Laurel. Her father actually was the general manager of the Laurel racetrack. So she actually grew up in the house that is still standing, the Victorian house that's still on the racetrack grounds. So Betty and Jane were slightly different in age. Betty was actually the older of the two of them. So they didn't know each other that much as children, but when the Laurel Horizon Society, which is the original name of our group, was founded, they started working together. Excuse me. So something that I actually asked Betty Compton if she could give me anything particular about her early relationship with Jane, and she emailed me a lovely piece of information and reminded me that it was actually 21 years between the founding of the Historical Society and the opening of the museum. And people may not realize that today that there was a lot going on in the community led by these two wonderful women. During that time, we actually had exhibits and we had house tours, and we raised money originally for other organizations. And then we realized that what we really wanted was a museum. So the fundraising efforts went towards supporting getting a museum. So they did a lot. And one of the things that I think people might not realize or wonder, I'm sure people sometimes wonder, why is it that the Laurel Historical Society is open on Wednesdays? I mean, that seems like an odd day. Why was that, has that in the past, and I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be forever, why were we open on Wednesdays? Well, it's back in the past because of Jane Cole. The city of Laurel gave us the armory to use as a place to store the artifacts, which we started to accumulate long before we had a museum. People would give us things and we had slideshows, and so stuff was coming in. And Jane decided that Wednesday was the day she wanted to be at the armory. So for no other reason than the fact that Jane Cole did days at the armory, when we opened, we said, well, that's the day some of our volunteers are used to working with the museum. So that's why, that is the reason. I mean, there's no scientific anything. It's just because that was Jane Cole's day. But while they were there, before they moved to the museum, I don't know if people realize that all the items they had gotten had already been cataloged. Now, that was done in writing and later put on computer, but we had all our artifacts already cataloged. You know, we've changed the system a little bit, but we had everything documented before we went in. And that's because of these two ladies. I mean, Betty particularly, who is an amazing person, and I would point out to those of you who don't know Betty Compton, she is one of the most wonderful human beings you'd ever want to meet. I mean, she's just a treasure. Jane, we lost Jane in 2009, and she had pulled back from the museum for health reasons earlier than that. Betty, however, and I'm sure you all don't realize, is going to be 95 this April. So that's an amazing thing. So, and she still emails. I mean, I just want to point out, this is a 95-year-old woman, and she still emails and gets in touch with you and is always happy to help. But more importantly, what she and Jane did was they would go to small museum association meetings. They met with museum professionals. They wanted to open their museum in a professional way. This wasn't just this is a community group with volunteers, but they wanted to make sure we did it the right way from the get-go. So we didn't have to do that makeup that a lot of museums had to do. They had an interpretive plan. They had a collections policy. They put all these bylaws, all these fundamental things in place so that as we have grown, we are able to accommodate and modify what we do, but we had this incredible base. We were even on computer in the 1990s, which, trust me, for small museums was an amazing accomplishment because I was working in the organization. So Jane and Betty basically are our founding directors, and they basically divvied up the responsibility. Jane was kind of a loner person. She was an interior decorator and frankly, sometimes a little prickly, but that was part of her strength and her charm. You know, she kind of knew what she wanted to do. And so our early exhibits really had a really good look because Jane was an interior decorator. I mean, that was her profession. And Betty, Monica, I think Betty was still active when you started at the museum, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yes.
She would come, she visited, you know. But...
Right, because she lived here and she now lives at Knollwood. But and she and Jane also realized that there was a point where they needed to pull back and let the organization grow. And so what they did was pull back, and we hired a part-time museum director before we had originally it was the Historical Society that was sort of separate from, but with all the same people for the museum. I mean, it was a little clunky. So the original first part-time director only worked part-time and only on museum things. And it's only when we actually hired Lindsay Baker that we integrated the two fully and just said, this is one job. So in many ways, you know, Betty did the administrative stuff. So while you would see Jane's activities more upfront, Betty in many ways is the heart and soul of the organization. She was the person who dealt with the volunteers in many ways. She knew everybody. She just is, I can't even say it. She wrote grants, created videos. I mean, I can't even speak enough about what a wonderful person she is. And I would point out they have also added to our collections. I mean, both of them had a lot of items, and so they added to the collection. And actually the collections committee is still going through boxes of things that Betty gave us when she moved out of her house. We're still accessioning those items. So I could talk a lot more about them, but probably that's plenty on Betty and Jane.
Yeah, great. And Karen, as we move to the next slide and to the next lady we'll talk about, I will just kind of echo what you said about them being really forward thinking, because at that time it would have been very typical to interpret this building as an 1840s historic house building. So when you walked in the front door, you would be greeted with scenes of what life would have looked like in the 1840s or 1870s, and just kind of interpret it, with historic furnishings and, equipment and that kind of thing. But they didn't do that. And because of that, we can tell a new story every year with Laurel in our changing exhibits. So every year there's a new exhibit. Every year there's a chance to dive in deeper and tell different slices of Laurel's history.
Right. I couldn't absolutely, I think that is the single most important decision that was made, because it has made all the difference. So many house museums are dying these days because of that static nature that Ann just talked about. So the lady you see right here is a woman named Jean Wilson, who's actually a dear friend of mine, and who will be 91 this year. She and Betty Compton actually share a birthday. So they both have their birthdays on the same day. And Jean is was a longtime volunteer. I mean, also very active on the original bicentennial committee. She ran the shop for Laurel's 100th anniversary, as a matter of fact. And so she was a board member for many, many years. She participated in our children's activities. She was always very interested in that. She was a chairman of the executive committee for many years. And as you can see from this photo, she also took many of the more mundane tasks. So it's people like Jean and Marlene Frazier, who's still actually active on this, who really were there for the early years of the organization and kind of helped put it together. In fact, Jean, at one point when we wanted to put the two organizations together, didn't think that was a very good idea, and at a board meeting made it very clear that that isn't what she thought was a good idea, and we kind of overruled her and said, no, we need to pull them both together. And she has admitted to me that that was actually a good decision in retrospect. So, okay. And so this picture, we were talking about this earlier. I'm trying to date this picture. This is obviously a much younger me with my hair much redder than it is now. I had redder hair and now I have blonder hair. This is all natural though, I want to point out to you. And I was trying to date this picture, and I think it's got to be, it's before 2007, because it's Joe Murkison is the editor of the Laurel Leader. The person on the left is somebody that I hope that many of you know. I'm thinking it was possibly, we did a whole exhibit on the 100th anniversary of the Laurel Leader, so I'm guessing that may have been the circumstance behind this this picture. But the woman on the left is the person you really need to focus on. That's Gertrude Poe, who is probably one of Laurel's most distinguished citizens. She's actually known, or was known, as Maryland's first lady of journalism. And the reason is because she is a woman who did many, many firsts. She went to law school. She went to the Washington College of Law, which is American universities, and fully intended to become a lawyer. So she was ahead of her time. This is in the 30s that she was doing this. And then the then publisher and owner of the Laurel Leader, a gentleman named Bowie McSweeney, when she came back from college, from her law degree, said, no, can you help me with this newspaper? So instead, Gertrude did a turn in her career and became the journalist. She was actually the editor and ultimately publisher of the Laurel Leader for 41 years, which is a remarkable achievement. When I was putting this together, I wanted to just kind of check on all the things. And if I listed all of Gertrude Poe's firsts, we'd be here all day. But probably most important to them was the president of she was the first woman to head the Maryland Press Association, which was then in its 50th year. And she was reported to be the first woman to head a national press organization. She's a member of the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame. She's been written up and honored. We honored her at one of our galas. She was just an amazing person to meet. I mean, she just knew everything and knew everybody and was never a hair or ounce of clothing out of place, let me just say. But just an amazing person. And she was a very big supporter of the Laurel Historical Society, not just financially, but also she's responsible for some of the very interesting items we have in our collection. For example, she's the one who donated the Laurel Mill Ledger that we have, which is the oldest document relating to the mills that we have, and that was one of her gifts. And actually, if some of you have seen the history booklet from the 100th anniversary that Laurel has, she's the one who actually put that together. So she was an amazing historian too. Gertrude lived to 101 and only died a couple of years ago. So she was another amazing Laurel person. Okay.
Yep, thanks, Karen. And I can't let anything about costumes or fashion or textiles go by, so I would just make a brief mention that, as Karen mentioned, Gertrude was a very big supporter of the Laurel Historical Society, and we honored her at our annual gala back in 2004, I want to say, Karen. I'm not sure if I have the year right, but it was quite a few years ago. And the theme was the Wizard of Oz, so she wore this spectacular emerald green beaded gown to our gala, and that dress, along with one other suit jacket and skirt made of Hermes scarves, is currently on display at the Maryland Historical Society in their Spectrum of Fashion exhibit. So they held it over from last year due to the pandemic. So I think it's going to go through the end of this month, but they have a companion catalog book. So it's just really another great connection that we just have to such a great lady and a nationally renowned and within the state of Maryland as well. Okay, and then we want to move on to some other history makers, and we're going to be talking about some of the women city officials. So Karen, I'm going to ask you just to talk a little bit about your research and some of the early firsts that we have. And then I'm going to bring on another guest speaker in just a minute. So Karen, if you want to talk about Ruth and Danny.
Right. Well, Laurel has part of our most recent exhibit was to talk about the city of Laurel government. And we were looking through our artifacts and we came across this plaque that said Ruth R. Sussman, faithful service as a member of the Laurel City Council. And frankly, in all my years, and I had been active in the society like for 25 years at this point, I had never actually heard, and I'd lived in Laurel for 28 years at that point, never heard of Ruth Sussman. So since I was doing the research on it, I mean, it was an interesting artifact to put on display. And looking it up, it turned out that Ruth Sussman was actually the first female council member in Laurel, and that was in 1952. So she was a council member from 1952 to 1962. I think she had come down with cancer because she died a couple of years after this, after she left. And she was actually the first president of the Laurel Council also. And part of what's interesting to me about this is I had no idea that she and her husband had run a business for 40 years on Main Street, that she had been active in the Seroptimists, the BPW, the Business and Professional Women's Club, the American Legion Women's Auxiliary. She's someone who had made, and she's a Girl Scout leader on top of all that, and it's one of the sad parts of history, and one of the rewarding parts when you start doing research is that you're able to bring back into community memory people who have had a real impact on your community, but whose contributions have kind of gotten lost a little bit. And I feel like Ruth is one of those people. I mean, she did a lot in the community, but there's not a lot of people active now who remember her a lot. And so it was really rewarding to kind of come up with her. And then I realized that we had another first that we needed to talk about, and that was Danny Donahoe, who was the first woman mayor of Laurel. She was a council member from 1982 to 86, and then she was the first woman mayor from 1986 to 1990. Now, I know that Danny, who actually lived diagonally across the street from me, was very active in many things. She was very active in choral activities. Her main job was in Main Street development. And I have to think that as mayor, that's something that she really brought to the table. So she's another person that we haven't quite forgotten about. In fact, the Laurel History Boys did something with her as a mayor not too long ago. So she's not quite as forgotten as Ruth is. So women, there are some firsts for women here. And Anne, I'm going to turn that over to you now.
Thank you, Karen. And yeah, we are continuing to make history in Laurel with Council President Valerie Nicholas. So Valerie, you are on camera now. And I just wanted to introduce the current city council president, the first African-American woman on the council, as well as the first African-American woman president of the council. And she was able to squeeze us in throughout her charity work and her time and obligations for the city council. So Valerie, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and just say a few words about your service and about the community of Laurel.
Okay, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Yes,
Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for having me. I've been interviewing all day. It started with the the WSSC Water Company. They featured me today for their Women's History Month as a speaker. So in the next couple of days, that presentation will be coming out. So I will make sure that you all get the link so you can view it. I am just honored to be able to serve. You know, as you most of y'all know, I've been on the city council for 10 years, 5 terms. I started out as an appointment, a six-month appointment, when a former council woman decided she was going to retire. And that appointment from 2011, here it is now, 2021, and I'm still on the council and serving as president. You know, it's an honor to serve. It's been tough. You know, I've had some rough roads, I've had some rocky roads, but through God's grace, I've definitely been able to endure. It's definitely been fun. I've learned a lot. There's a lot of responsibility serving as a councilwoman, and there's even more responsibility serving as a council president. You know, we're very busy. Tonight, when Ann called me earlier today, I was doing an interview, and then I chair the the city's disability committee, and we're working on putting some things up and getting a toolkit together. So that meeting was from 6 to 7. So I kind of cut that meeting early and ran home and got here so I could be on with you all. But it's truly something. I really try to make my rounds in the city. One of the things that I definitely do is keep myself very visible, very approachable, and I live a very public life. I live here on Philip Powers Drive. I lived on Montgomery Street for 4 years, and then I lived over in Springhouse Apartments, and then I lived over by the golf course. So I try to stay in the mix of everything. I not only provide my city council cell and the email, but I also always provide my personal number and my personal email just to keep myself reachable. We're busy. You know, the city's got a lot going on, and in this COVID environment, life has changed for us. With the nonprofit, as most of you all know, it's called Love Is Not Enough. That nonprofit was birthed out of me surviving domestic violence. In 1995, my baby was killed. I was a survivor of domestic violence, got beat up in my 7th month of pregnancy. And it's just been a long journey. For 20 years, I was in the federal government. And in my 20th year, my brother was battling kidney failure. He had been battling it for many years. So I retired from my good government job as a senior executive to take care of him. And he lived for 17 years on dialysis, which was something. It's been a long, long road. I retired to take care of him. And in the midst of retiring, that's when I started my nonprofit and just helping people. I said many times that I didn't just start feeding the homeless and doing charity work since I've gotten on the council. This is my 24th, I've lost count. It's either my 23rd or 24th year of serving. I, started off serving sandwiches. I didn't have a car when I was in the government for some years, and I used to ride the bus. And in riding the bus, I would, catch the bus and then go to, the metro, and I'd have to walk to get to my building. And in walking to get to my building, I used to see homeless people on the street. I'd never seen homeless people before, people begging, because in Roanoke, Virginia, where I'm from, I'd never experienced that, and I was perplexed by it. And I didn't have a lot of money. I was a GS2, making $134 every 2 weeks. And when I moved here in 1986, I moved here with $4.73, and I was running from abuse. And when I saw these people begging for food, I couldn't work the whole day. I was like, I'd never seen anything like it, never experienced it, just didn't know it bothered me. So as the weeks passed, I used my money and I started making sandwiches, whatever I could get on sale. Turkey, chicken. I'd make sandwiches and I'd put them in my book bag, my tote bag, and I'd give them out to people. And that's how it started. And people, at first the reception wasn't good because people didn't know me. But I think it was the consistency of keeping myself, in front of the people and seeing them as I got off of the metro. It started a relationship. And those 6 to 12 sandwiches that I made birthed into now a full operation for me. In some of the articles, which have been well written and very nice, that have been written about me in the Laurel Leader, I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I prepare, I get up and get myself together for work, but I also have my car fully stocked. And I make all of my deliveries. I leave out 4:35. And I make all of my deliveries before I head to work and happen to be there by 8:15, 8:30. So when I get off from work, it's the same routine over. And, as I say, what started with just a few people now has birthed into hundreds of people. Even my work on the city council has been a labor of love. It's service and legislation, because a lot of the people that call me for assistance are not necessarily calling me for a city issue. It's more of help for someone. While there are some city things in there that they may need, but the biggest thing is needing services. And I've been able to help a lot of people. I don't name names or put Facebook pictures up. Only when I post things on Facebook, it's because I have the permission of the person. But I can see now, just after the whole 10 years that I've been on the city council, how my service in the community is truly tied to the position. And it's an honor to serve. I'm very happy to be here. I find it an honor to be a history maker. When I first started out, when I saw the vacant in the Laurel Leader in 2011, in June of 2011, I saw the vacancy, and I just said, I had no idea that I would have been selected. But what started off is that ad, and to this place now, I'm just very thankful. I'm very grateful. I'm full of gratitude. And, my words that I say to people is, my goal is to leave people better than I found them. That's been my whole life of commitment, going through my trials, growing up in an abusive household, going from one abusive relationship to the next, going through a serious depression, being suicidal. My commitment to people is to help them get to a better place and to leave people better than I found them, whatever service that may be. It may be something on the council. It may be needing trash pickup, or needing the bins, or finding out what happened in that piece of legislation. But it's all, to me, wrapped up in just a labor of love. And I truly just feel honored. I really strive to do a good job I try to make sure I'm making the right decisions, not personal decisions, but decisions that benefit the residents. That's the whole goal, and making sure people, get the services they need and keeping things very transparent. As most people know, I'm very open about my life. I'm very open about my experiences and things because, I just want to empower people. I really just want to help people. So I just find it really it's just an honor to be here. Can you all hear me? I can't hear you all at all. I can't hear anybody.
No, yeah, that's right. That's kind of the awkward part of our conversation here is that we have to rely on the chat and Q&A. So if there's any questions or comments for Valerie, please feel free to do that. But I just want to, thank you for being here with us tonight and again, sharing your story and sharing your inspiration. Yeah, you really are making history in so many ways with the state of Maryland and with our community here in Laurel. So, and then, so Scarlett says, we can hear you. And
okay, thank you.
I think we hear you in many ways, and thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service. And, thank you, so much, for being here, for sharing your story, for never holding that back, because you just never know whose life you might touch with it. So thank you for being so open for that. And again, just thank you for being a friend of the Historical Society. And I guess we will just move on. But again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to keep talking with us.
Okay.
So I'm just going to move on with the rest of our slide here and just talk briefly about some of the women that we've featured in some of our past museum exhibits. And our museum is still closed. We're hoping to open before too long here. But in 2019, we featured Laurel's healthcare stories, featuring doctors, nurses, and midwives. And I just want to talk briefly about two of these. I'm going to talk about Dr. Flora Brewster. Dr. Brewster was an extraordinary woman. And she had just a very brief stint in Laurel, but we found out just so much about her amazing life. So she was a teacher, she was a physician, she was a surgeon, she was a lecturer and a suffragist. She was born in 1852 and died actually rather tragically in 1919, just right before women fought to get the vote. But she started as a teacher in Pennsylvania. She was in failing health, so she went west to improve her health. And while she was there, she studied medicine with another female doctor in Chicago. And then she completed her course of studies at the Chicago Homeopathic Medical College. Dr. Brewster moved to Baltimore for a little bit. She worked in a gynecologist's office before opening her own gynecology practice in 1882. Her sister was Dr. Cora Brewster, so she and her sister were both doctors. And together, the two of them started a publication called the Homeopathic Advocate and Health Journal, which was a layperson's publication meant to kind of inspire people to take more natural remedies for some of their illnesses and sicknesses. So she opened a sanitarium in Baltimore after her practice, and she moved her sanitarium practice in 1906 to Laurel. So some of you know that there have been kind of a succession of sanitariums in Laurel, especially around the turn of the century. So she took over what had been the Keeley Institute, the Keeley Sanitarium. The sanitarium was named after her, so we have the Brewster Sanitarium. It was short-lived. She actually filed for bankruptcy in the same year that she moved to Laurel. She ended up moving back to Baltimore and then on to Seattle, Washington, where she died in 1919. But I think just a great connection to Laurel and such an amazing woman, an early advocate, an early doctor and surgeon. We also featured African-American midwives in our 2019 exhibits. And I wanted to pass it over to Karen just briefly to talk about a little bit about her research with Mrs. Matthews.
Okay.
Nancy Daniels. If you don't want to, that's fine, because I know that Sandra's going to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about it for you if you don't want to.
Well, we were doing some research and we came across Mrs. Matthews, and I will let Sandra do most of the talk about that because I hadn't researched this for this.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was mostly talking about, again, like you helped to research, you talked to the family members, and
Right.
also the story of the photograph too, because that was another,
Right.
you know.
And I would like to add to that I'm doing some other research into Laurel's free Black population in 1860. And part of what we had found already in terms of putting this exhibit together was that there was an African American lady, and her last name was Prout, P-R-O-U-T, in 1860, who was 88 years old and was listed as a midwife. So that's all we know about her. I mean, we couldn't find any other information about her. So she obviously was an early involved in the medical profession in Laurel, but that's what we know about her at this point. But if you'd like to talk about the photo, please, yes.
Oh, no, it was another, you know, instance of something that was a copy of a copy. It was just in very bad condition. So that was another one that we were able to get restored and just kind of make it into more of an exhibit quality piece. And so, Sandra, I wanted to ask if you would tell us a little bit about Mrs. Matthews and her work in Laurel.
Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to just highlight Miss Gertrude Matthews. She was a midwife in the Grove because, you know, at that time, African Americans were not really welcomed in nearby hospitals. She grew up in the High Ridge area section of Laurel and Howard County, and she was the mother of 10 children of her own. I spoke with, well, in talking from the research for the exhibit, I do know that she brought into the world several St. Mark's members, George Gibson, Judith James, her granddaughters, Nancy Daniels, Ruth Jones, Gertrude Curry, just to name a few. But in actuality, Miss Gertie probably birthed the majority of the people either 75 or 80 years old in the Grove. In fact, from getting some research from her granddaughter, Pat Mundell, she remembers her grandmother always talking about getting the water ready and, you know, having white towels. So, and personally for me, because, you know, Miss Gertie was I refer to her as Miss Gertie, as most people in the Grove called her at that time. And if you were her grandchild, either if you were related to her, they called her Mama Gertie or something like that. But she pierced the ears of every little girl in the Grove, including myself. And I still have my ears pierced. My ears are still pierced from when she did them when I was a little girl. And because she just did everybody's ears. Like I said, she was an active resident. She was a resident of the Grove and a very active member of St. Mark's. And as you can see in the picture, maybe you can't see it, but she really loved to really dress up for Sundays, because you can notice that she has on the beautiful hat, the white gloves, the matching purse. I mean, you know, she was just a beautiful lady. And if you look, she's probably in her front yard because she was known for being a very good gardener. Her front yard was really beautiful with the flowers and all that thing. And she was also known, I remember, you know, because she was about the same age as my grandmother, people always talking about that she was a very good cook, how she just made everything from scratch. Her granddaughter told me about the rolls she used to make. I mean, she just had a reputation for being a very good cook. And on Sundays, you know, sometimes the pastors from St. Mark's would stop by her house, you know, to get a delicious meal, because she was known for that. And I guess when she had 10 children, you had to know how to cook. You had to be very good at that. She, you know, she loved her children, she loved her family, and most importantly, she loved God. She was a woman of God and a very strong faith. And if I missed anything, if any of her family is on, and if I missed anything, you can put something in the chat. but I just remember her just being a warm and loving lady. She was just always very pleasant. She was just, always had a smile because, as I said, she was about the same age as my grandmother. So I didn't know her on that type of level, but I just remember her just being such a warm and delightful lady who just, loved everyone, because of course I saw her every Sunday at church. And her family, she has a very large family, and most of her children remained in Laurel, in the Laurel area. So, it's very close-knit, loving family as well. So as I said, she was just a wonderful lady, and I just could see her being a midwife, wanting to help, just to bring, other children into the world. So, and I'd like to thank Pat Mundell and David Burley, her grandchildren, for helping me, for their assistance in getting a lot of the personal information that I had about her.
And Sandra, I just want to jump in real quickly. Looks like Marlene is her granddaughter. She's here. She said thank you for the very kind words about Mrs. Matthews. And then Valerie Nichols wanted to ask if you knew when she passed away, what year?
That I do not know. I knew she was probably in her 80s or 90s when she did pass. Because I'm the church historian, but she passed before I became the historian. I'd have to, okay, Marlene just put it in 1968.
Okay, so we're very close.
Right. Thanks, Marlene. 1968.
Yeah, that's great. And again, thank you for the comments, for the questions as well. Like I said, it's kind of a one-sided conversation, but when you jump in with there, it just creates such a great conversation and record for us all. So Sandra, I'm going to ask you to continue with some of the stories of the women of the Grove. Some of them we met last month with our conversation about Black History Month, but I know you have some additional information for us tonight.
Okay. Miss Bertha Moore, I was coincidentally, she lived on the same street on 10th Street, and I grew up on 10th Street. We were about 4 or 5 houses apart, and she and my grandmother, who also lived on 10th Street, were very good friends. So I grew up knowing that she was, a lovely lady as well. When I spoke about Miss Matthews having being the mother of 10 children, Miss Bertha Moore had 13 children. And I did some things I did not know, but, and reading some of the research you all had done on her, some things I did know, but I did not know that she was from Halltown, which is the Black community on 197. And her mother was a member of the Hall family. And I did know that she went to the Laurel Colored School, which is located across, she was a student there, across from St. Mark's. And then later on, she became a teacher at the school as well. Because schools were very segregated in Prince George's County at that time. She attended school in Washington, D.C., and says to attend high school classes offered by Howard University. And as I said, she became a teacher at Colored School number 2. She settled in Laurel, and she eventually, she married Mr. Charlie Moore. I remember him. He was the gentleman. Now, I don't know when he became, but he was blind. I don't know exactly when, because my grandmother told me that he wasn't always blind, so I don't know if it came from an accident or some type of illness. But I just remember the two of them as always being such a devoted couple to them, to each other. I also did know that Miss Bertha was the daughter of slaves. Her father escaped slavery, and he eventually joined the Union Army to fight in the Civil War. And as I said, her mother was from the Halltown community. In the 1890s, Miss Bertha's parents were among the earliest members of St. Mark's Church, because St. Mark's was founded in 1890, and we know that's located 601 8th Street. She, as I said, she was a grand lady. She was, once again, and basically all the women that are being highlighted, they were very grounded in family, and they were very grounded spiritually. They had a very strong belief in God. And as you know, I guess as African Americans, you really had to have a strong foundation in God, because a lot of times things didn't always, go as you wanted them to go. And then this picture, you'll see Miss Bertha and Dr. Levi Miller holding the shovel at the St. Mark's Fellowship Hall groundbreaking ceremony. And that's such a cherished picture at St. Mark's. We also have the shovel itself in a beautiful display case. And she was, as I said, she was very instrumental. And with Dr. Levi Miller, I believe at one time, he was a district superintendent, because at that time, back in that day, there were, even though there was a conference, there were two separate conferences. There was a conference for the white churches and another conference for the African American churches. And I think Dr. Miller was instrumental in getting funding for the project, and the two of them there holding the shovel in the groundbreaking ceremony. Miss Bernice Brooks, she was a lifelong resident of Laurel Grove, and lifelong member at St. Mark's. She was born and raised in the Grove. She was one of 8 siblings, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And she was a grand person of the church. She was raised in a Christian home with strong family values. She became a member of St. Mark's at a very early age, and she remained a lifelong member. The great thing about her was that at that time, a lot of people maybe her age maybe didn't graduate from high school, but at the age of 90, while attending classes at St. Mark's, because they had GED classes, she was awarded her GED certificate, and she was very, very proud of that. She was employed at the Department of Agriculture in Beltsville for more than 30 years. As I said, she was a leader in the church and the Grove community. Because of her, there were the people in the Grove. I mean, you always counted on her to come up with the vacation, because she would plan trips every year. And a lot of people just, I remember she used to plan trips for us to go to the beach, and it would always, and she was in charge of the teen club, and it always amazed me because her children were grown. Her children were adults with their own children, but she still took the time to do things for us. I mean, things like teen club, making certain that all of us went to Cars Beach every couple of times each summer. She did all the planning for that. I remember she planned a cruise. People went on cruises. They went on vacations to different resort areas. I mean, she did all of that. And along with being a leader in the church, because she was a member of basically a lot of organizations, United Methodist Women, the Senior Choir, the Finance Committee, trustee. I mean, she was the chair of the Administrative Council. She was a Sunday school teacher. She was a delegate for St. Mark's to the annual Baltimore-Washington Conference to represent our church. She just was just a wonderful person, you know, and she always had such a loving smile. Her leadership abilities, I remember a lot of times when she did things at the church, and well, she and my mother were first cousins, and a lot of people, and a lot of us were related. I mean, and she would always pick on the same people who knew that you couldn't say no, or your parents weren't going to let you say no. So it was always like, if she needed something done, she would just call on people like me, knowing that my mother wasn't even going to allow me to say no. Or I don't know, Cynthia Whitfield's on there, a lot of other people who just, our parents would just not let us say no to her. So we just were so but it was good because it taught us leadership skills, organizational skills. So even though you complained about it as a child, you know, in the long run, in the end, I mean, it taught you so much about how the church operates, how the community operates. So, you know, a lot of the people who went to St. Mark's around my age, we can thank her for the leadership skills that we developed, because she was always just out there, and she didn't mind putting you out there with her, you know, so to speak. And she represented she always wanted the Laurel Grove to be represented well at the city council. She attended city council meetings on behalf of the Grove. She, you know, she always wanted our point of view to be respected and heard. So she was just a wonderful lady. And as you can see in the other picture, when the Emancipation Park was dedicated, of course, she was speaking on behalf of the church. And that was just the type of lady that she was. I mean, she was just, and she would always say, somebody helped me when I needed help, so I want to help others as well. That was the type of person that she was. And she lived until she was lived to be 95 years old. And basically until the end, I mean, we never knew of her being ill or sick. I mean, she was my go-to person. Whenever I needed to research anything about the Laurel Grove, I always went to her because she could remember things like it was yesterday. And Laurel, St. Mark's truly lost a saint and an angel when she passed on. So once again, as I said, if I missed anything, send it to the chat, then, because I heard you, Valerie, did you know her, Mrs. Brooks?
I knew her extremely well. I called her Aunt Easy.
Yes, that's what we called her, Aunt Easy.
And she was an advisor to me when I first got on the council, and I spent much time at her house, and she would tell me what she thought of everything and the votes and the legislation and everything. She was my go-to, and I miss her dearly. Yes, she gave me a lot of wisdom that I still cherish. I have a little notebook of some of the things she told me that I've wrote down, and I keep them in my Bible. Yes, so I thank you so much for that presentation. You brought tears to my eyes when I saw her picture. When I saw Bernice Brooks here in the top left corner, I just began to just reminisce and reflect back on the conversations we had. We were very good friends.
But she was a wonderful
Oh my goodness.
lady.
She would call me up and let me have it and told me I better get over there. And I would get there too.
Yes, yeah. I bet you didn't waste any time getting over there either.
Oh no, I didn't waste any time. She'd tell me what she thought about it and what she thought about other people too.
Yeah,
but
well,
yes, I miss her so much.
Yes, she had a way of bottom lining things, but in the nicest way.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. That was great.
Thank you. Miss Catherine Hopkins, as we called her, Miss Katie. Once again, she was born in the Grove, and she was one of our treasures. I mean, once again, grounded spiritually, strong love and faith in God. She was a St. Mark's musician, or musician pianist for 46 years. And here's a picture of Miss Katie Younger, and the two choir members are Bessie Matthews and Marva Thomas, I believe. Yeah, yes. And this was a picture, this was an older, well, you can tell because, you know, Bessie and Marva look extremely young right there. They're beautiful women. This was before our sanctuary was remodeled. And Miss Katie, you know, she was taught piano lessons from Miss Dora Mac Carter, who lived in the Guilford area. Some of, well, if you're people are from St. Mark's, we remember who Miss Dora was. And she was a pioneer also, because she was the first Black woman to provide private music lessons in Howard County. And as I said, Miss Katie, you know, she shared her talents with us. She was a musician for every choir we had, adult choir, young adult choir. I mean, you know, she was just the musician. And if I'm not mistaken, my mother told me that she never accepted any payment. And, you know, right now you couldn't get anybody to really do anything without, you know, getting some type of monetary payment, but I don't think she accepted payment. I remember her working at OW Fair. She was beloved by the staff and the students there as well, because I, you know, was a student there, and it was like you just had those extra set of eyes on you when you were there. You knew that you were just, you know, being protected, because, you know, it's at that time, there weren't a lot of African-American students in the school. And sometimes parents felt kind of apprehensive about letting their children go there to OW Fair or Laurel Elementary, because they didn't know how the children would be treated. And that's why at that time, excuse me for my phone ring, I hope my husband gets it. That's why when the Laurel Grove School was still in operation, and some parents chose to allow their kids to go there instead. And because, as I said, they were very apprehensive, so you felt that sense of comfort and at ease, knowing that Miss Katie was in the school, and you just felt like, you knew that she wouldn't let anything happen to you or anything, like, not that anything did, but you still went there with a kind of a little apprehensive about being there. And she was, like I said, she was a wonderful lady. I remember she was a musician at my wedding. And so that was a while ago, but she lived such a full life. And when she passed in 2012, once again, St. Mark's lost such a grand lady. And the same way I was talking about Mrs. Brooks, Miss Katie was older than Mrs. Brooks, but if I was researching anything, I could talk to Miss Katie, and it was just overwhelming how she would remember things like it was like the day before, and I always said, oh, I just pray to God that he will allow me to keep my mind and my memories the way that, she was able to do that. I also remember the last Sunday that she wanted to come to be with us for homecoming service at St. Mark's. And, we were just so happy to see her. And, when you walked up, she just remembered everybody. And it was because she just saw everybody grow up. She saw us grow up. She saw our parents grow up. I mean, she just saw, and she was just a wonderful lady. And she will just always be remembered as such a lady of faith. And it's funny, you couldn't talk about Miss Katie without talking about her older sister, Ms. Ethel Baker. she was also a lady of great faith. She'd always talk about how she believed in the power of prayer. And she passed away at age 99. I had here 2 weeks. I think it was like 17 days before her 100th birthday. And she was also, even though I don't remember her being a musician in the church, but she was also trained on the piano as well. Now, probably, maybe she did play at the church. I think she did play at the church. I don't remember that. But I was just remember Miss Katie. But she was, she was a pianist. She was trained in the piano as well. And she just, as I said, just a lady of just great faith, great strength. And when you saw Miss Katie, you also saw Miss Ethel, because those two sisters, I mean, they were inseparable. If you saw one, you saw the other. So that's about it.
Hey, there we are. I'm back now. Sandra, thank you so much for sharing all of those stories, and for everyone who joined in on the video or in the chat. Thank you so much, because that just adds all of these layers and all these personal stories. And I mean, that's what keeps these stories and the memories alive. And, you know, these fantastic women who live to be in their hundreds in a couple of cases, Miss Katie and Miss Bertha, and even going back to Gertrude Poe, you know, they're still in living memory because we're still talking about them. We're still inspired by their accomplishments, that we're inspired by their faith, and that makes us do our job better. And we can see that today with the work that you do, continuing their legacy of documenting the history of the Grove, Sandra, and also what we heard from Valerie and her story, and just continuing to be a change maker in Laurel. So thank you for sharing the stories. Thank you for your service to documenting the history of Laurel. So I am going to I'm going to ask Mary Gibson to come on. I'm going to ask her if she can just pop on and just talk with us a little bit about Mariah Bacon. Mary Gibson is the church administrator over at Mount Zion Methodist Church over in Bacontown, which is on the Anne Arundel County side of Laurel, over there at Whiskey Bottom. So Mary, if you don't mind, do you want to tell us a little bit about Mariah Bacon and the beginnings, not only of Bacontown, your community, but about your church as well?
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, good. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to come on and to speak to you guys and to talk about Ma Bacon. I'm from a small community on the outside of Laurel in Anne Arundel County, which is called Bacontown. Now, Ma Bacon was a freed slave. Her master's name was, last name was Dorsey. And what happened was back around 1860, he freed her as a slave and gave her property. And from that property, raised the town of Bacontown. And the main thing about Bacontown is that the church at that time, Mount Zion, was built, and next to it was a lodge, St. Jacob Lodge, eventually it was called. The reason why I'm so involved in this is because my mom, Elsie Matthews, who passed away very shortly, February 6th, she was raised by Edna Stringfield. And Edna Stringfield was the great-granddaughter of Ma Bacon's daughter, and her daughter's name was Elizabeth, Mary Elizabeth Henson. Now, I have a picture of Mary Elizabeth that's in my house. It always was in my grandmother's house. I didn't quite know who she was until grandmother explained it to me. Now, Edna Stringfield was not my mom's biological mom. She was her godmother. My mom's parents died when she was quite young. So Edna and Lonnie Stringfield raised my mom. And as I said, they were kin to Ma Bacon. Joan Clark, who is also a member of Mount Zion and lives in Beltsville, she is the great granddaughter of Ma Bacon. So there was a lot of history there. And back in 2017, the Dorsey family came to our church and shared all this information with us that we weren't quite aware of. We knew that Bacontown started from a slave owner who had given this property to one of his slaves, but we just didn't quite know who that was. And so they brought with them the picture of Ma Bacon, which we had never seen before. And so now that stands that's in our church in a very prominent place. Now, the home across from our church was a slave home, and that's where she lived. And that's where my grandmother and my grandfather and then Lonnie Stringfield lived until they died. That home is still standing, but it's in terrible disarray, and so it's falling, but it's still there. The church itself, Mount Zion, we got incorporated around 1869 is when we became a full church. And next to that church is St. Jacob's Lodge, number 28. And that building, before it became a lodge, was a school for the Black kids of Bacontown. So my mom and her brothers and sisters attended that school. I also have a picture of my uncles and some of the other kids standing in front of that school as children. That's another picture that I inherited from my mom. These kids that went to St. Jacob's Lodge, they went to school from grades 1 through 7. It was a one-room schoolhouse. It had first floor and a second floor, but all the classes were held on the first floor. So it's a lot of history in those particular areas, and connected to that is the graveyard. Now, the graveyard has a lot of slaves buried in it. If you face the graveyard and look to your right, back in the bushes, there are a lot of graves of slaves there, so I've been told, and I'm surprised, I'm sure it's true. But of course, back then there were no markers, so we don't know who's really buried there. We just know there are a bunch of graves over there, and really not sure who those people are. But the graveyard itself, we've gotten to the point the church has, but we've cleaned that graveyard up, and we've discovered a lot of our ancestors are in that graveyard. And so that graveyard is kept up very well. And the church is in the process of trying to, we're now have a lawyer where we're trying to get the lodge and the graveyard as part of Mount Zion, only because the lodge itself disbanded years and years and years ago. There was a part of that lodge that was located in Merkert, and I believe also at Asbury, but all of that has been disbanded. A lot of the members have passed on. My mother used to be one of their chairpersons, and once she got dementia, it was just, that's just not there anymore. We still got a lot of the history. We have the banners. We have all that kind of stuff. So we got all that in the lodge itself. So we got a lot of stuff. But it's just, it was just great for them to come to our church, the Dorsey family, and share with us the ancestors from the white side and the Black side and how it all came together, because a lot of us in the church did not know that. And so that was just a wonderful thing to see, the documents that they bought, and then to bring her picture was just totally awesome. So we are really proud of our heritage. The Civic Association of Bacontown way back when went, and there's a like a playground that's located in Bacontown, and that's been named the Bacon Playground. So all of that still, so to kind of bringing the community in. We were, in the beginning, when I grew up in Bacontown, it was all Black. It was nothing but Black, Black folk, Afro-American, whatever. There was that, right? But now it's mixed. We got, all different races in the community, which is a good thing. But the church and the graveyard and that lodge, those buildings that she first started on that property, it still stands today. And I'm really proud to be a part of that history. And I guys, I thank you all for let me be allowed to speak about it. Thank you.
Mary, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And I know we've been in touch with Brian Jenkins too, so thank him for his assistance with all the tech support as well. And again, thank you for sharing this incredible story and the incredible history of how essentially one woman just started a whole community that endures to this day. And it's incredible because, you know, you're so intimately a part of it, but there's just so much history and people just drive by it. And I think if they just knew all the history just hidden in like one or two buildings in the graveyard, like you mentioned, I think they, you know, would love to hear the full story of that. So I think that's continuing to tell the story of that and to bring that side of Laurel into the story that we tell is also very important. So thank you for sharing that with us tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and then I think we're going to end this section. Karen, did you want to say anything before we move on?
Yeah, actually a question for Mary. Was that a Rosenwald school?
You know, I saw your question, and I wanted to say yes to that. Yes, okay. I want to say yes because it was part of the county. So I want to say yes. The picture that I have of my uncle standing in front of the school, their teacher is a white man. He's standing there with them. So I want to say yes.
Okay. And I thought you might find, I've just been doing some research into the 1860 census, and there are 4 Black people, I sent this to you directly, but in the District 1, who are named Bacon.
Yes.
So I wondered if they're related to Bacontown.
I cannot answer that for you because I know of no one in Bacontown who has the last name of Bacon.
Interesting. Do you know the origin of the name?
It came from her, Ma Bacon. That's where it came from.
Okay.
That's why it was called Bacontown, because it was her property.
Okay.
And she gave it to the community and she really gave it to the church. And from that church, the whole community was developed.
Right. I just thought the name coincidence was interesting, that there were 4, and it was just one woman with 3 young children. So, you know, a woman named Dolly. Is that what?
Not familiar with that. Not familiar with that name. Now I know a gentleman did come to our church a few years ago. His last name was Bacon. But he was not affiliated with us at all. He came from someplace completely different.
Yeah. So this was close by. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Don't know. Don't know. But you know, while I have you on here, I would like to share the pictures that I have. So I'm going to figure out a way for Brian to take those and send them to you guys so you can put them in the building. The pictures with my uncles and all standing in front of the schoolhouse, and then the picture also of her daughter.
That would be incredible. Thank you, Mary. And I know we're going to continue to work together. And
yes, we do.
I'm glad you said something, Karen, too, because there's layers and there's everything is interwoven. And so I think there's a lot more of the story that we can dive into. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This is Sandy Johnson. Mary, I have a question for you. When you cleaned out when you went through your cemetery over at Mount Zion,
yes,
did you see any members of the Laurel community? Because, you know, back in the day, African Americans couldn't be buried in a lot of the white cemeteries. So I know that there are quite a few family members from Laurel.
Yes, there are.
Who were there because it was like either at Mount Zion or either down at Queen's Chapel at their cemetery as well. Right. So yes. I'm sure you found quite a few people from the Grove community who were buried over at Mount Zion.
And as you know, we're all connected. So yes.
Because we were all the 3 churches. We'll call ourselves sister churches.
Yes,
we were all under that Laurel charge at one time.
Yeah, and just as a point of, and you already know this, my maiden name is Matthews. So as you know, my dad is from the Grove area. So you were talking about like you were talking about my aunts and stuff, and I was like, oh my God. So yes, they are down there. And then Memorial Day is a big day at the church where, you know, not last year, but hopefully this year maybe, where a lot of the members from your church and also from Beltsville, when they come to the graveyard, because a lot of their members are there, their family is there. Yes.
Okay. Because you know my mom, I'm Shirley Carey's daughter.
Girl, I know exactly who you are.
I know you do. I know you do. Grew up together. I know you
Yes,
do.
we did.
Look,
Yeah, I
and,
do,
and
baby.
let
I
it be
do.
known, cousins at that.
Yes, ma'am. That is correct. Yes, that is correct.
I think that's great. And yeah, I think also Karen just said that a cemetery tour might be in order. And I know that there's been some Anne Arundel County genealogists. I think you met Tina Simmons. I know that she's been doing a lot of research into death certificates and burials in the county. So there's a lot more to learn. So thank you for that.
Yes, yes.
All right, so I know we're going over, but I just love our conversation. So I think we're just going to kind of keep going with our slides. I had wanted to talk a little more in depth about the history of women's suffrage in Laurel, but I talked a lot about that in the previous webinar we did earlier in the month of March, when we talked about the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. And also the National Votes for Women Trail. So I won't go too far into it tonight, but when I send you the follow-up email with the link for this recording on our YouTube channel, if you want to catch that recording of the suffrage webinar we did earlier this month, you can watch that as well. So I'm just gonna basically say that as Karen alluded to, and Sandra and Mary, there's a lot of good research, keep coming out. The more stories we figure out, the more pictures, and the more people we ask, and the research we dive into, there's a lot more that we are finding out about the history of Laurel. And one of those things was that there actually was quite a few women in Laurel that were active in the suffrage movement from about 1913, as early as we can document, to 1920 when they got the right to vote. And so so basically what we're trying to do is to find out more about the individual lives of these women, as well as their chapter activities. We do know that there was a chapter of the Just Government League of Maryland in Laurel. So we're trying to find out documentations through other sources to find out more about the lives of these women and about their suffrage activity. And it is very frustrating because there was not much recorded in the Laurel Leader, which is frustrating and ironic as well, that we have such a great local resource in the museum archives, and it virtually says nothing about suffrage activity in Laurel, which we know from national sources. The Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, even the New York Times took place in Laurel. So I will refer you to the recording of the webinar for more information, and just to say that along with some of the other research topics that we mentioned tonight, we'll be diving more into this. So please look out for more research as we uncover it. It's coming out of Laurel. And so we're going to pass it over and talk about some other types of history makers, some local creators and living legends of Laurel. So Monica, do you want to talk about some of the ladies?
I'll do the short version. Okay. The first person I'll mention is Deborah Randall. Deborah Randall founded the Venus Theater, and she founded Venus Theater in 2000. Just looking in the chat real quick. Sure, we have a few more. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm used to reading the chat too. Deb Randall, we call her Deb Randall. She's a trained actor. She used to do political satire in DC, but considers herself more of a writer. So she started writing and performing solo shows. And then she then wanted to do more collaborative theater. So she started reading plays and other playwriters. So Venus Theater, she founded it in 2000, but it came to Laurel in 2006 to the 21 C Street location. And Venus Theater has produced 70 women empowering scripts and given 1,000 opportunities to artists. Venus Theater is the longest running regional women's theater in the nation. And something else really interesting is that Venus Theater makes sustainable creativity a priority. They recycle set pieces, they borrow to avoid building. They want to keep a green footprint when it comes to women in theater. So. And then, okay, and then Randy Croup. Randy Croup was the last in her family to run A.M. Croup and Sons Incorporated. She retired in 2019. She was a fourth generation shoemaker and bootmaker. Her family's name is synonymous with high quality leather boots. Her great grandparents were shoemakers in Latvia, and her grandfather, Adolf Michael Croup, moved from Latvia to Canada and then to New York, and then to Baltimore, and then Ellicott City. Let me see if I'm missing anything. So they came to Laurel. They had a shop in Ellicott City on Main Street, and then they moved the business to Laurel in 1927. So they had a location on Main Street in Laurel, and then in the 1960s, they opened a factory on C Street in Laurel. So real quick, Randy Croup, she started working, she graduated with a degree in fine arts, and she did work for the family business for a while, but she described it as being challenging to work for her father and her aunt. And she said it could be really intense. So for a while, she moved to Michigan for 3 years before her father asked her to come back to Laurel to run the family business in 1979. And she said she tried it for 5 years, and 5 years turned 40 years. And so she continued making boots for the horse racing community, and she also expanded to include custom work. And she made the boots. They made the boots worn by Seabiscuit, the actual Seabiscuit jockey, and the movie Seabiscuit.
Yeah, Monica, thank you for that. I think it's great because, you know, as historians, we get caught so much in the mindset of documenting the people in the past, and it's a challenge for us to try to document history as it happens. And I think that was our biggest lesson from last year and continuing this year with the pandemic, is to make just to be aware and make a bigger effort to document history as it happens, and to try to get these things. So that's why we're trying very hard to get the stories and to talk to people like Randy or Deb and some of the people that are still, you know, out and about and still doing their things in Laurel and making a difference, and to try to document and share their story with the people, because so many people, you know, have heard about Venus Theater or Croup Boots, but they maybe don't know all these other wonderful stories that led into who these individuals are, their businesses, and the whole community of Laurel. So I think it's really important to add these layers. So thank you for talking about these people. And Randy and Gertrude were featured in 2 of our biography spotlights that we've been doing on social media and on our blog. We're going to be featuring Valerie this week as well, and then we're going to finish out the month with Deb as well. So again, that's just putting out this information, recording it, and just making sure as many people as possible just know the incredible stories. You know, you don't have to have, you know, huge national figures, although we do have those connections as well. There's some, you know, really great people and really great stories right here in Laurel. So I just want to move on to just a few other announcements. And then I know Valerie wanted to say a few words before we wrap up. I know we went a little over the hour that we kind of planned for, but I just thank everyone, thank all of my panelists and special guest speakers and everyone for participating in the chat. It's just been really great, and I just can't wait for the time that maybe we can have these things in person and just kind of bring us all together face to face again. So Monica and I are planning to do another collection conversation next month. We tentatively have it scheduled for the end of April, but since April is Garden Month, is that right, Monica? National Garden Month.
National Garden Month.
You know that I'm not a gardener, but we have such beautiful formal gardens in the area with Montpelier and Snow Hill and the Snow Hill Garden Club. And even just some of the local residents of Laurel. They've taken, you know, fantastic efforts to do landscaping and beautification of Laurel. So we're going to be highlighting the things that we have in our collection, and like we did the past couple of months, just talk to the people who are helping to make history and to document it as it happens. So we don't have the exact date for it yet, but again, we'll be having that registration up on our website shortly. I just wanted to put out a shout for our walking tours. Currently, we are on a wait list for our upcoming April and May sessions, but we are hoping to either add slots or add additional dates to that. So if you are interested, just please know that we will be doing additional sessions coming up, some of it based on a lot of the discussions and research that we've been talking about tonight as well. So April is going to be Upper Main Street, talking about the Laurel Museum and the early mill industrial settlements. And then we're talking about building buildings and building community in May. So we're going to be talking about historic buildings like the Armory and the Laurel High School, then also talking about the Grove community and getting to put places with some of the faces and people and the stories that you heard tonight. And then just very quickly, we do have two traditional webinars coming up in April in addition to our conversations that we're holding now. So in April, on the 8th, we're going to be talking about brood-egg cicadas and Laurel. So this is going to be really quite interesting. It's a little bit of a departure from our normal history and culture talk, but it is a family-friendly event. So if you remembered where you were in 2004 or earlier, when the 17-year cicada cycle hits, we're going to learn a little bit about the history of that as well as the science behind the cicadas. So we have that registration, and I'll put that in the box in just a second. And then kind of as a belated celebration also for April, I do know that April in Maryland is Archaeology Month. So we're going to be talking about the Guilford Quarry Cemetery and some of the archaeological investigations and historic research that has gone into documenting that cemetery. There's also connections with slave burials and with some of the families in Howard County area. So a little further out from Laurel, but still not too far. And there's some members and connections to the Laurel community as well. So I'm going to put that into the chat just briefly. But I will just say thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Valerie now, and then Monica, Sandra, and Karen, I will let you say any other closing remarks before we end the recording. So I'm going to bring Valerie on as a panelist, put that in the chat, and then, okay, Valerie, we can see you now. So if you want to unmute yourself and add any other comments.
I just wanted to say thank you for the phone call inviting me. This was fantastic. I've got at least 7 pages of notes here that I've taken. This is fantastic. Please keep me involved. I would like to be on all of the webinars, whatever involvement I can be with the Historical Society, Laurel Historical Society. I would love it. I just finished our family history, and I would be happy to share it with you all if you would be interested in it. But I found some interesting things out about my family and my history, but this history has always been very dear to me, and I just really want to thank you all for what you do, for the roles that you play with the Historical Society. This is very valuable. I have enjoyed it. I'm so sorry that it's ending now. I would like to be on another hour just hearing more, but this is just a wealth of information, and it's wonderful history. That's really, keeps me drawn to Laurel, because it's just so much history here and wonderful people. But thank you so much for just involving me. I appreciate this.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I think that kind of brings us back full circle to where Karen started us off tonight, is looking at the slide there, looking at the building behind me. It's yes. Just full circle to Betty and Jane and Jean Wilson, and then moving on to people like Karen and Marlene, who, very early volunteers for our historical society that really set the stage for what we do. And I think it's just a really big accomplishment that, I'm just another one in a very long line of very, strong, dedicated women involved with the Laurel Historical Society and the community of Laurel. So I want to, thank you for your work. I want to thank Karen and Sandra for being our panelists, for Mary for being a guest speaker as well. So Karen, I'll pass it over to you first. Are there any closing thoughts before we end the recording?
I'm so delighted to have everyone here. I know we had a fairly large number of people listening in, and it's really great to be able to share some of the stories of the people that I have known and really loved. And I thought everyone's presentations were really interesting and added a new piece of information. So if you're an historian, just love to do that. And I particularly, Sandra, I know you have rich information on the Grove, but Mary, learning more about the Mount Zion community was absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear? Okay. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, and I really enjoyed this. And
Yes.
I have so many questions. It's always great to hear more history about the Grove, and I'm leaving with questions. I have so many more questions, so I hope we get to do it again.
Yes.
I look forward to it.
Is it my turn, Ann?
You're muted, Ann. You're muted.
Okay, thank you, Monica. I was trying to see on two screens, and I just invited Mary back on, so it pushed all the panelists off, so I have to kind of peer over the top of my laptop. But Sandra, yeah, please go, and then Mary, if you don't mind, you can say a few words as well, please.
I'd just like to thank the Laurel Historical Society and the museum for giving us this opportunity, because it's always a pleasure for me to talk about St. Mark's and about its members, because for so long their stories were not told or weren't shared, and we weren't even invited to share them. So I just thank you all for giving us the opportunity to, get a better insight into the wonderful people who are residents of the Grove, who were very active members of the church. And I just thank you all, and I look forward to sharing more about the Grove with the Laurel Historical Society. Thank you so much.
Yes, I just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed this presentation. I wasn't sure exactly what I was gonna hear or what I was getting myself into, but I want to say that it's been really great. It's been very informative, and it just makes me want to take a few more steps to do some other things. And thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for talking about the wonderful women of Laurel, of all the communities of Laurel. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, I think that'll just about do it. So thank you to all the lovely ladies that I shared the screen with tonight. Thank you to everyone in the audience as well. Continue to think about what you heard. If you have additional questions or comments, please feel free to contact us. Our information is there. You can call or email us. And then hopefully before too long, you'll be able to come to the museum and see our continuation of our 2020 exhibits. And then we'll move right along into a different story for 2022 as well. So I will stop the recording just shortly. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone involved with this. We will be posting the recording shortly on our YouTube channel, and just wish everyone just a wonderful time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay happy, and just think about what you learned here tonight. So thank you.